Hello, fellow late night lurkers. I'm OldDadGuy. I tell scary stories so you can question every sound in your house at 2 a.m. You're welcome. No turning back now. OldDadGuy here. Glad you decided to tune in for the final episode of Knocks on the Ridge, a Sasquatch story. Make sure you stick around and listen for the ending. It's pretty crazy. Here you go. I told myself I was leaving. I even drove partway out. The problem with telling yourself you're done with something is that you're often the worst possible audience for the lie. By the time I reached the main road out of town, the part of me that likes clean breaks was outnumbered by the part that keeps looking into dark doorways just to see if anything's home. So, I turned around. The diner was open, the bell announcing me like I'd been gone for a year instead of 20 minutes. The same waitress raised one eyebrow when I slid into my booth. "I thought you were headed out," she said. "I was," I said. Then I remembered I left some dignity up on the ridge and figured I'd go back for it. She poured some coffee without comment, which I took as either support or a non-compete clause in her will to live. "Everett still around?" I asked. She jerked her chin toward the back corner, where a man was pretending to read a local weekly and actually listening to every word spoken in the place. Everett didn't look surprised to see me. He just folded the paper in a way that made it clear it was about to become a coaster. "You're going back," he said, not asking. "I just want to look around in daylight," I said. "See where those prints go." He gave me a slow nod. "Daylight's not a magic trick. Just makes it easier to see what's watching you." The morning had that early March kind of light. Even though it wasn't March, where the sun comes in sideways and the shadows stretch halfway to the next county. I parked the truck lower than usual, near an old pull-off with a stone fire ring choked in weeds. From there, I planned to cut in through the saddle and follow the track I'd seen the day before. The prints were still there, big and smaller, both clear in the damp mud. They went upslope at an angle that made my thighs ache just looking at it. I followed, stepping wide so I didn't disturb the impressions. The climb was work. At one point, I had to grab a trunk to steady myself, and when I did, my palm came away smelling faintly of musk. I told myself it was the sap. The tree disagreed. Halfway up, I found a break in the undergrowth where something large had come through recently. Laurel branches bent back, one split at the main stem. No snapped twigs littered the ground. They'd either been carried off or the thing that broke them had done so in a way that didn't leave debris. The path wound into a gully where the ground went soft underfoot. That's where I saw the first stick structure of the day. It was bigger than the one in the clearing, easily 10 feet tall, built from logs too heavy for one man to lift without swearing in front of his kids. The logs leaned together in a rough cone, and the base, something, had dragged in armfuls of leaves until the whole thing looked like a collapsed haystack. There were no footprints inside, no signs of sleeping, just a smell like wet dog and cedar mulch left in the sun too long. I circled wide and kept moving. The trail from there narrowed into a tunnel of rhododendron so tight I had to duck and push through with my shoulders. When I came out the other side, I was standing in a bowl-shaped clearing ringed by rock outcrops. That's when I realized I'd walked into the middle of something. It started with sound. Not the knocks this time, but a low whistle. Not musical, not like a bird, more like the air moving through a hollow tube. It came from my right, maybe 40 yards off. Before I could even turn around, there was an answering sound from the left, a higher pitch, sharper. I stood still, listened. A branch popped behind me, uphill. Then a soft thump in front of me, down in the bowl. I caught movement, a dark shape sliding between two boulders, and then another, smaller, at the edge of the tree line. It hit me then that I wasn't tracking one thing anymore. I was inside their perimeter. The humor part of my brain piped up with, well, congratulations, you're officially the slowest gazelle in the herd. The larger tracks angled toward a ravine at the far side of the bowl, and despite every rational part of me yelling, don't go in there, my feet apparently had union clearance to ignore management. The ravine was colder, shadowed even in mid-morning. A thin stream ran along the bottom, chattering over rocks. The sides rose steep, and at the top edges, the trees leaned in like they were trying to hear a secret. About 50 yards in, I found a series of prints in the mud along the bank. They overlapped in places, big and smaller, side by side. No claw marks, no heel drag. Each one set with weight that pushed water up around the edges before soaking back in, fresh. I crouched to look closer, and that's when I noticed the reflections in the water. Not mine. Up the bank on the opposite side, a dark form stood just back from the edge. Tall, broad, still. When I looked directly, it was gone, but the brush moved once, a gentle sway, and then stilled. I kept moving, slower now, every sense stretched thin. From ahead, the low whistle came again. From behind, a soft click of stone against stone. Off to my left, something heavy shifted in the leaves. I thought about Everett's "daylight's not a magic trick" line and decided he was underselling it. Daylight just means you can see how many of them there are. The ravine narrowed into a pinch point where two large boulders leaned together, forcing the stream through a gap no wider than my shoulders. On the far side, the mud was trampled in a wide semicircle. I counted at least 6 distinct impressions, some overlapping, some angled in ways that suggested they'd been moving around each other, not just walking through. I stepped through the gap and felt the air change. Colder. Still. That's when I heard it. A long, deep exhale from somewhere above me. I looked up and saw head and shoulders framed against the sky. Huge. The outline fringed with hair that caught the light. It didn't move. Didn't make a sound beyond that breath. There's a moment in every bad decision where you can still walk it back. I was standing in that moment. I could turn around, go back through the pinch, and retrace my steps to the truck. Or I could keep following the tracks deeper into the ravine, further into whatever this was. You can guess which one I chose. The tracks led to a rise where the stream tumbled down in a small waterfall, maybe 6 feet high. At the base, the mud was churned so badly it looked like someone had been digging. Large stones were stacked along one side, some with moss rubbed off as if they'd been handled. And there, in the churned mud, was something I still can't explain. A line of 3 large prints, then a pause, and then one single print set deeper than the rest. Toes splayed, heels sunk almost an inch deeper. It looked like someone had stopped there, put all their weight into that one step, and then disappeared. I looked up the falls, scanning the slope. No tracks going up, no disturbed leaves, nothing. The forest had gone quiet in that way that makes you realize quiet has weight. I backed toward the pinch point, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Once I caught the gleam of an eye between two trunks, amber in the low light, and then it blinked and was gone. By the time I stepped back into the bowl-shaped clearing, the sounds started up again. Whistles, clicks, the occasional soft knock, guiding each other, keeping track of me. I didn't run, but I didn't stop either. When I reached the saddle, I felt more than heard something large pacing me from the tree line. No rush, no attempt to hide completely, just there. When the truck came into view, I half expected to find it surrounded. It wasn't. The pull-off was empty except for my vehicle. But on the hood, right above the driver's side headlight, sat a single river stone with a streak of quartz in it. I stood there a moment, the damp air cooling the sweat on my neck, and realized two things at once. One, I had been in the middle of more than one of them, maybe a whole group. Two, they let me walk out. I picked up the stone, turned it over in my hand, and placed it gently on the ground before getting in the truck. The road out felt longer than it had the day before. Every bend seemed to hold its breath. Halfway down, I glanced in the rear view. At the top of the last rise, silhouetted against the gray sky, something stood, broad, tall, still. I didn't slow down. I didn't sleep back in town. I tried. I showered off the ridge, but the smell of damp leaves and old earth clung like a thought. My motel mattress had the bounce of a trampoline designed by an accountant. I kept replaying the ravine, the pinch point, the tracks that doubled and overlapped like a family photo you weren't invited to be in. When I finally did doze, it wasn't rest. It was a held breath with commercials. Around 4, I gave up the idea of pretending to be reasonable. By 5, I had coffee from a lobby pot that had seen things and would not be speaking to the police. By 6, the truck was pointing toward the highlands again. The sky a flat sheet of pewter that made the taillights in front of me look like coals. I told myself I was coming back for closure. That's a decent word for returning to the scene of a bad idea. What I meant was, I wanted one clean look, not a silhouette, not a suggestion between tree trunks. I wanted to stand at the edge of whatever this was and have it look back so that, years from now, I would not be left squinting into my own memory like it was fogged glass. I parked lower on the road this time, farther from where I'd been left the river stone on the hood. The pull-off was quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. I killed the engine, rolled the windows down, and let the cold seat itself on my skin. The morning had that hollow ringing sound, like metal cooling. I took only what I needed: a small pack, water, a bar, the old walking stick I'd named in my head but I wouldn't admit to out loud. I left the rest. If I was going to sprint back to the truck like a cartoon character, I wanted as few props as possible. The climb toward the saddle was familiar now in the way that you learn any neighborhood by foot. This route, that rock, the place my boot had slipped yesterday and made me say a word that would get me uninvited to certain family gatherings. Mist clung low, braided through the trunks. Birdsong came in fits and starts like someone testing a microphone. At the edge of the saddle, I stopped and listened. Nothing carried that didn't belong. No stone clicks, no branch breaks that hinted at more than gravity at work. I stepped into the corridor of flattened leaves I'd noticed before, the one that had that purposeful line. It still ran like a hallway between two rooms, trees shouldering up on either side. I followed it down toward the ravine mouth, where the ground dipped and the stream began arguing with rocks. There were prints again, fresh. One set large, one not quite as large. The edges still held water, not yet slumped by time. They angled off my path and slipped into the trees like two tall brothers headed for the back door of a party. Okay, I said quietly to my nerves, which were a group chat with opinions. You wanted the look. You get the look. I didn't announce myself with knocks. I didn't pantomime being harmless. I just moved like a person who knows he's being timed. The ravine was darker than it had any right to be at this hour. The stream had lifted from yesterday's mist and now threw a little voice around the bends. I went careful through the pinch point, feeling the cool off the rock like a church's stone in winter. On the far side, the churned mud told the same story as before, with newer lines written over older ones. Weight placed, weight moved, no hesitation, no heel drag. Something stepped off to my right, not a snap, not a hurry, just a correction in the forest's posture. I turned my head that way and saw nothing but the absence of bird chatter in that slice of trees. Morning, I said, because Midwestern manners are a malpractice you never cure. I kept to the bank where the mud could tell me more than the leaf litter would. Twice I stopped and let my breathing settle, not out of fear, not exactly, but because the ridge seemed to appreciate quiet, and I had run out of words that did anything but make me feel like I was trying to shoo a thunderstorm with a hand towel. The little fall came up quick, the apron of water sliding over stone like it had somewhere better to be. The rocks there were dark with damp, their moss flattened where something had been sitting, or crouching, or merely existing with more patience than I had ever mustered. I felt them before I saw them. It's hard to describe awareness without making it sound like superstition. The closest I can get is that sensation you get when a dog stares at you from across a room, and you look up in instinct. Multiply that by a forest. To my left, 20 feet back in the timber, a shape pivoted through a gap without disturbing a branch and settled into stillness so complete the road had to adjust around it. To my right, closer, a form as tall as the overstory moved one step and then stopped. And straight ahead, between two hemlocks that looked older than regret, a figure stood out where there was no trick of backlight to blame. I didn't register scale at first. I registered proportion. The head sat like a decision on those shoulders, hair falling not like a coat, but like a thing that had grown there with purpose. The neck wasn't the absence of one. It was the kind of wide column you see on linemen, all function. The torso wasn't bodybuilder square. It was long and thick. A barrel set on two pillars that knew the shape of this ground the way a river knows its banks. It stood with its weight slightly forward, knees soft, as if even stillness was a readiness. The hair, fur, lay in uneven swaths, longer at the forearms and calves, shorter across the chest where I could see the rise and fall of breath. 15 feet, maybe a hair more. Close enough that I could see the damp on the longer strands where water had beaded and not yet shaken free. Its face? I have tried to make that face less than it was, to lower it to an animal catalog entry, to reduce it to be ape-like because That's a shelf we have in the mind, and it keeps the china from rattling. The truth is messier. The brow was pronounced, yes, and the eyes were deep set beneath it. But they were forward facing, with an intention that did not bleat or bark or twitch like a deer's. The nose was broad and flat, not snouted. The mouth was closed, the lips dark, the muzzle barely a suggestion. There was gray threaded through the hair along the jaw. If I had to name an expression, I would be arrested by the metaphor. Patient. The eyes were not red. They were not glowing. They were the color of old amber when the sun is filtered through smoke. And they were on me, not past me. I have read accounts that say people freeze in these moments. Those accounts are correct. My joints filed a union grievance and refused to cooperate with any directive more complex than do not fall down. My breath moved, but small. The part of me that cracks a joke during dental procedures raised a timid hand and offered very quietly, "Hi." So I said it. Hi. It came out the way you speak to a neighbor's large dog when you meet it off leash for the first time. Friendly, but with a clause. No answer from the thing in front of me. No dramatics. No bluff charge. It exhaled once, a long, measured breath, and took a step, not toward me, to the side, as if to show me the line of its body in profile, and then back to square, a small half pivot with control I'd expect in a dancer. Behind me, leaves shifted. I didn't turn because it felt like the wrong sort of test. "Okay," I said softly, and lifted one hand, slow, open, empty. My palm faced out, that absurd human ritual of, I have no rock. I tried not to anthropomorphize, but the way its gaze ticked to my hand and back registered. If it didn't understand gesture, it at least noticed it. We stood like that, me trying to decide if my knees were going to give a public performance, it measuring me like I was a post you might hang a line from. Time stretched. A small fly did loops in the cold air, and I watched it with bizarre gratitude because it was the only thing behaving like physics class. Then, from beyond and above, deeper in the trees, a single knock, not loud, not a shotgun crack, a note on wood. The big one's head turned slightly toward the sound and then back to me. The line of its shoulders didn't change. The eye contact didn't snap. If anything, I felt included in its attention, the way you do when a friend keeps you in a conversation even when the kitchen timer goes off. Something changed in the air. Pressure, maybe. That subtle weather shift you feel when a small front moves over a hill. The shape to my right ghosted farther into the understory, like a decision made noiselessly. The one on the left lowered, then rose, not hiding, not posturing. It read, if I'm honest, like escort duty. I didn't say I'm leaving now, because every animal in the world knows the difference between words and intention, and my intention mattered more than my mutter. I pulled the pack straps tighter and eased one foot back a half step. The big one didn't mirror me. It didn't mimic. It simply let the space exist. Another step, breathing small. The stream voice beside us kept speaking nonsense. I took 3 quiet paces back toward the pinch point, not turning, not presenting my spine like a target, not because I thought it would strike, but because everything in me suggested that maintaining a frame of mutual regard was the only currency I had. It didn't follow. At the pinch, I turned and slid through the gap. On the far side, the bowl clearing felt like a stage after the actors had stepped into the wings. I breathed properly for the first time in minutes and felt lightheaded in a way that had nothing to do with oxygen. A shape paralleled me on the high ground. Not close, just present. Another held the tree line on the opposite side. And here is the part that makes me sound like I lost an argument with a wind chime. I was walked out, not harried, not driven, the way a good usher brings you down the aisle with a hand extended that never touches your sleeve. At the saddle, I paused and turned back toward the ravine mouth as a bad idea and a necessary one collided. The big one stood at the lip, not stepping into the open, just set back where the shadows combed through the hair on its forearms. It did not raise an arm. It did not nod. It watched. I raised my palm again, a tiny salute, the same lack of utility as a wave to a lighthouse. The reply came not from it, but from my side. Two soft taps, farther down the ridge, not as a message to me, but as the note that the brief chapter had ended. I made the road in one piece. I did not hurry at first, and then I did, because I am honest if nothing else. The truck stood where I left it. No stones on the hood this time. No leaves arranged to prove the point I didn't need help remembering. Inside, the steering wheel felt like a relic from a previous life. My hands shook a little. Not fear, exactly. Aftershock. The engine caught and held. I sat there with it idling, staring through the windshield at nothing, and laughed once, short and a little unhinged, because the only thing I could think was, I have just had a conversation in a language I don't speak, and I did not embarrass myself completely. On the way down, a doe scrambled up the bank and bounded across in front of me, all nerves and knees. A mile later, a hawk rode a stream of air like it was painted there. I stopped at the first wide spot and stepped out into the cold, letting the quiet wrap and unwrap me while the exhaust ghosted away. When I looked back up the grade, the ridge had that same face it always wears. Indifferent, old, busy with its own weather. If you didn't know, you'd never guess anything lived there that could look you in the eyes and withhold judgment. At the diner, the bell did its exhausted ding. The waitress looked up and decided in 1 second that I needed coffee before she needed my order. "You look like you saw a tax bill," she said, setting the mug down with that careful thud. "I saw them," I said. My voice made it real in the room in a way the woods hadn't required. "Up close. One of them." Her eyes did a quick check of my face like she was cataloging whether I had acquired the kind of stare that gets you your own booth forever. And? "And I'm not special," I said. "They didn't pick me. They just let me." It felt like standing on the wrong side of a threshold and being allowed to look in for a second. She nodded once, the way a person does when a diagnosis lines up with what their grandmother already told them. "Pie?" she said. "Both," I said. "For science." Everett slid into the booth across from me without asking, which is his style. His flannel had accumulated a day's worth of stories, none of which he intended to share. "Well," he said. "They're not a rumor," I said. He snorted softly. "Never were." "I was walked out," I said. "Not chased. Walked." He leaned back, mug in hand, and examined me like I was a map with coffee stains. "Then you did something right without knowing which thing it was. That's the only kind of thing there is with them." I didn't ask the question that wanted out. Why me? Why now? What rule did I accidentally follow? Because even if he had an answer, it would have been a story and not a manual. We ate in the quiet you get after a storm, when all the talk has already been done. I told him a few pieces, left others on the table between us, unsaid, the way you leave a tip and trust that someone will understand the math. Going back, he said finally, eyes on the window where the gray day pressed its forehead to the glass. I need one more night, I said, surprising no one, least of all myself. Not to push, to close the loop. He wagged his head once, neither yes nor no. Don't bring gifts, he said. Don't take any, either. They're not a church, and you're not a missionary. Rule of threes, I said, trying on a grin. He didn't give it back. Rule of leaving when you're still welcome, he said. Back at the truck, I sat with the key halfway to the ignition and let a moment pass. The ridge had put a mark on me, not the kind you can see, the kind that rearranges how your other marks make sense. There's a cost to that. There's also a dividend. I didn't have the ledger balanced yet. Afternoon would fall early. It always does when the sky is already tired. I drove up anyway. At the pull-off, I left the phone in the glove compartment because the bars it would chase weren't there. I packed light again and walked with less gear and more attention. The camp I'd struck looked like I'd never been there. The log had its own damp back, the fire ring its blackened stones, the ground its lacework of frost and leaf. I stood at the edge like a man looking through his old schoolyard fence. The urge to rebuild everything and light a fire I didn't need was strong. I didn't. I stepped back into the trees and sat instead on a low rock where I could see down slope and up without moving much. The light bled out of the day in that sudden way this ridge favors. The trunks became ideas. The air found my wrists. I didn't call out. I didn't hum. I didn't try to be bigger or smaller than I was. I just held the shape of myself where they could take a measurement if they wanted to. When it came, it didn't come with theater. A weight moved the ground 15 feet behind me, then stopped, then moved again to my left. The kind of deliberate placement that speaks of confidence rather than caution. I didn't turn. I let them have the angle. From the saddle, a single knock, soft as knuckles on a bedroom floor. From somewhere lower, an answer, with another voice layered under it, like harmony that wasn't trying to be pretty. The air shifted ahead of me. I knew the feeling now, the way a presence has a draft. I looked up and there it was again, at the tree line. Not stepping into my clearing, not shrinking back. Set where the last light could find the planes of its face. A different one. I don't know. The eyes held a similar age. The hair along the forearms had more gray. There was a scar under the left eye, pale and short, a little divot of story I would never hear. We regarded each other the way neighboring farms do at the fence. I lifted the hand again. This time the head tipped a fraction. Not a human nod, exactly. A weight shift that acknowledged my existence on purpose. My chest did a foolish private thing. We sat in that held quiet so long that light finally surrendered, and what had been detail became shape, and what had been shape became location. A small breeze came uphill and slipped past both of us. It brought the smell I learned to brace for, musk and leaf and wet stone, but softer now, like the scent of a coat that's been in rain and drying beside a door. It didn't catch in my throat. It just was. I said very softly, "I'm leaving at first light." There was no answer I could call an answer. The line of the shoulders remained. The tree beside it did its old, slow work. Somewhere lower, something smaller moved with that same deliberate, soft-footed patience. And I understood, with a simplicity that burned off my last bit of doubt. I was inside a family's evening. "Thank you," I said. The words were for me, not them. But the ridge kept them, and that felt correct. I walked out in full dark with my headlamp low and my breathing even. Nothing paced tight. Nothing forced my line. Behind me, the knocks came once more. 2 notes, spaced, like the closing of a door you don't lock because you don't need to. At the truck, I sat with the cabin light off and key quiet and tried to store the look of those eyes somewhere I could find it again without rummaging through fear. I must have sat a long time because when I looked up, the sky had opened a seam, and one hard star showed through, indifferent and perfect. I slept in the cab with a seat reclined to the exact angle that ruins your spine and saves your dreams. When I woke, Gray was already walking the road. My breath fogged the glass. I sat up slow, joints replaying the previous weeks. I stepped out, stretched, and faced the ridge to say a goodbye that felt theatrical until something inside the trees shifted once, as if to say, "We heard you. That's enough." It was. I rolled out and let the miles change the story from body to memory, which is how most truths get their polish. What I understood, what I still understood, is simple and not small. You can be looked at by something not interested in your opinion of it, and you can feel more seen than you have in years. I'm not sure there's a better definition of awe. Morning came soft, not in the gentle rocking chair sense, more like the soft of an old quilt you've pulled from a trunk, smelling of cedar and years gone by. The ridge was pale in the distance, its spine caught between the slow bleed of daylight and a sky still reluctant to commit. I stood outside the truck for a minute, the breath in my lungs fogging into the cold, thinking about the words I'd said the night before. I'm leaving at first light. There's a weight to promises made in the dark, especially the kind no one made you give. The road down from the pull-off wound through its familiar rhythm of switchbacks and shadowed hollows. Every bend felt like it could hold a watcher, but the trees kept their secrets. I didn't hear a knock, didn't see movement. The sense was still there, though. Not absence, just a lid closed on a jar. The diner was doing its mid-morning shuffle. The bell over the door offered its tinny, half-hearted greeting, and the waitress glanced up from topping a coffee mug. She saw me and, without a word, pointed at my usual booth. "You look like you need the big plate," she said, as she poured. "Bigger, if you got it," I said. She slid me a menu out of habit, though we both knew it was just theater. So, I took a sip of the coffee that was already on its way to the too strong category. So I went back, stayed the night. Her eyebrow went up just a notch. "And?" "They let me leave," I said. It wasn't a joke. She studied my face for a beat, then nodded like that was the answer she'd been expecting. "You want pie, now or later?" Everett arrived before my eggs did. He had that knack old men have of materializing from some parallel room of the universe. He slid into the booth, flannel still smelling faintly of wood smoke. "You didn't press," he said. "No," I said. "And you didn't get pressed." "No." He gave a slow nod. "Then you left right." I told him only some of it, about the eyes in the low light, the way the smaller shapes moved with patience, the two knocks that sounded like a door closing behind me. I left out the finer details, the parts I didn't want to hand over like coins to be spent by someone else's telling. That's all you need, he said, as if he'd read the parts I hadn't spoken. I checked out of the motel and loaded my gear. My hands moved through the motions like they were packing up any other trip, but the air around me felt heavier, charged, not threatening, more like I was folding away a story before the ink had fully dried. There's an impulse, after something like this, to talk about it until the shape wears down, but the ridge felt like it had loaned me something, and I wasn't sure I wanted to pay it back in gossip. I decided I'd tell it my way, later, maybe to the right listener, or to no one. Sometimes the best place for a story is between your ribs, where it can be fact checked. The road out of town curved toward an overlook where the highlands rolled off into folds of muted green and gray. I pulled over, stepped out, and stood with my hands in my pockets. The wind up there was sharper, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. From the overlook, you can see the spine of Chestnut Ridge as it marches away, dip and rise, until it disappears into a blue haze. Somewhere in that sweep were the places I'd camped, the pinch point in the ravine, the boulder where I'd sat without a fire. I watched for a minute, long enough for the breeze to sting my eyes. And then, in that thin band of trees near the far ridge line, a shape shifted. Not a deer, not the sway of wind. Broad, upright, still. I didn't wave, didn't raise my hand, just let the moment hang there until the shape eased back into the trees and was gone. Back in the truck, the road unwound beneath me. The ridge stayed in the mirrors longer than I expected, a dark line against a sky that was finally brightening. I thought about the green maple leaves, the river stone on my hood, a knock that wasn't meant for me, but that I still heard. Somewhere between towns, the radio found a station, just static and a faint voice talking about weather on the other side of the state. I turned it down and let the hum of the tires take over. There's a part of me that will always want to go back, and a part that knows I already took more than I was owed. For now, that balance feels right. The ridge will still be there, and if it wants to, it knows where to find me. Did you hear about the guy who got hit in the head with a can of soda? He was lucky it was a soft drink. Meh. OldDadGuy. You thought you were alone, didn't you? But they've been watching the whole time. Like, subscribe, and maybe they'll let you sleep tonight.